Hi, everyone. I'm LeiLani Cauthen, the CEO of Learning Counsel News Media and Research, and also a proud EduJedi Grandmaster. I've been working a lot with the EduJedi over the summer for our new reference guide that'll be coming out. And we've gotten on the road. This event from New York, New Jersey is virtual, but we were just in Dallas and Atlanta, which was exciting, actually thrilling, to be able to see people again. And maybe we'll be back. Bergen County's invited us for next year to come back out physically and see everyone. So that'll be great. I want to get you started with understanding that you can take a break anytime. Of course, it's a virtual event, so we won't know you're gone. But keep your browser tab open for the event and come back. Raise your hand digitally at any time. Type in comments, type in chat. We'll be happy to answer as we go along. We want to get a feeling kind of like we're together, and we wish we were seeing you live in person. Thanks to our sponsors for today. We're going to hear from some of them today. ClassLink, ViewSonic, Booker, VHS Learning, and Learning.com were so gracious to sponsor this activity today for New York and New Jersey. This is the way the day is going to roll. We're going to first hear from Rahesha Amon, who's a Senior Executive Director for Leadership and Professional Learning, New York City Department of Education, and Nakia Haskins, who's Leader Development Coach of New York City Department of Education. And then we'll hear from Gary from ClassLink. Then I will do the keynote on learning leadership versus systemic inequities. This has been the topic that we've carried through quite a few cities right now. Very interesting for people, really interesting conversation. We hope you get involved in what we're talking about. Then we'll have a video showcase from some of our sponsors. And then we'll have Karen Watts from Brooklyn, the Executive Superintendent of Brooklyn North Borough Office. Then we'll have a brief break with time for you to ask more in-depth questions. And then our guest panelists, Dr. Tom Palmer, Superintendent Peru, Kawita Adams, Superintendent City School District of New York, and Marlon Williams, who's a principal from Dr. Daniel Hale Williams School. So this would be an exciting, really rip-roaring day. We have another day tomorrow, so we hope you join us then. There's a whole nother conversation that we'll be having. So let's start first with Rahesha and Nakia. And I'm going to pass you guys the screen to share out. So good to have you both with us.
So good afternoon, everyone. It's really our pleasure to be here with you all. And as LeiLani said, it always feels better when we're in person and we have the opportunity to see one another. But we are grateful for what technology has allowed for us and provided us to still be connected in this way. And so we're really going to share with you our journey here at the New York City Department of Education and some of the shifts that we have made throughout this pandemic. And so we're going to be talking about leading, and we always like the play on words in leading, as our office is the Office of Leadership, Professional Learning, and Continuous Improvement, but we like to call it Leadership, Empowerment, and Development. So we're going to take you through our organization status pre-COVID, how we pivoted to the new normal and some of the shifts we've made, how we've now and are maximizing professional learning, our current reality, lessons learned, and imagining the possibilities. So myself and my colleague, Nakia Haskins, really looking forward to learning with you, and we'll take questions at the end. So let's get to it. So our pre-COVID status, as I'm sure many of you, really, we were always in person for our meetings and we were not using technology. I can remember someone actually introducing me to Microsoft Teams and saying, you can use Microsoft Teams to have meetings, and we just did not. And so quickly, though, COVID-19 shifted us to our current reality, where we pivoted very quickly as the largest school system in the country to Microsoft Teams, Zoom, and any and all platforms that you could think of to deliver professional learning to our talent groups. And so one of the things that we realized as we pivoted is that our goal was to now thinking about professional learning and the ways that we can best maximize. Next slide, Nakia. And so we've coined this term maximizing professional learning, but it was really pivoting in COVID to ensure that we were thinking about professional learning in this blended space, but delivering it to all of our talent groups. And for us, that is assistant principals, deputy superintendents, superintendents and their teams, borough office and central. And just so that you're aware, we have over 1,600 principals here. So in alignment with our chancellor's priority of developing people, we have worked to strengthen the internal leadership capacity of our teams through this blended hybrid model of professional learning. So while we were anchored in our leadership standards during pre-COVID, we really made a quick shift in thinking about how best to serve adult learners. And so we lifted our ISTE standards for leaders, and we focused a great deal on equity, and advocacy, and really the advocacy of the adult learner, and being able to not only experience professional learning that may have been mandated or of mandates, but also what are the type of opportunities that would help you grow your learning. We also obviously looked at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, especially during the pandemic, and realized that our need to come together, that meaning shifted greatly for us. We also anchored in our work leadership connection elements for advancing equity. For us, it really became important that we build coherence and that the relationships across our system were strengthened, but again, that equity and advocacy lens. Who has the opportunities and access to what professional learnings were very important to us. And finally, Malcolm Knowles' principles of adult learning theory. We realized that many of us were obviously classroom teachers here, and so often we had not shifted in our delivery and thinking about adult learning and those things that would best serve them. So we adopted very quickly 3 models for delivering professional learning. And so model A for us, again, having over 1,600 principals, is one large synchronous presentation for all of our talent group. And so that, we often try to lean away from, in that we have to do these as in webinar formats, and often they're not interactive. But when we are facilitating to a larger group, we found that this works well. But also option 2, which is what we prefer, is that synchronous sessions, but for smaller groups. And so while many of our meetings, for example, this afternoon, we'll be gathering all of our principals, that would be webinar format. And then the learning is broken down into smaller groups by districts. We also implemented in this virtual space this train the trainer model, in that synchronous sessions, very similar to what we do in person, but these synchronous sessions where we train that particular leader of that talent group, and then it is expected that they facilitate that learning to those in their borough or district office. And then finally, one that we try to stay away from is really this asynchronous models. Though we found in thinking about adult learners, while we may feel that synchronous learning is best, many adults want to learn at their own pace. And so any of our opportunities for professional learning now are now in an asynchronous fashion. That was not something that we did often pre-COVID, unless there were topics that were compliance or legal mandates.
So what we decided, well, hello, my name is Nakia Haskins. And so in going on with this, I'm leaving for those models. And the models are important because they also, it depends on the type of information that you're getting across. And so with the maximizing learning guide, we really try to help facilitators, because our system is so large and there's different content areas, decide what type of professional learning they were attempting. So that's the first phase, identifying your goals and objective. Phase two, designing self-assessment, executing, then you evaluate, and then there's a quality assurance, because you are the master of your content, but we wanted to make sure that there was a structured way that professional learning was being shared with the system as a whole. So we have an arc of learning that you will see at the end of the presentation, but it's really about thinking, what are the points that you need to get across to your audience on said topic for the year? And then putting those in place and identifying the number of meetings or sessions, as well as the type of sessions and models that you may choose to use to deliver that information. Because remember, we went from a all in person or mainly in person to a virtual environment. And so that was a shift for all adults, including in taking into account their learning styles. And so then in phase two, we had to decide on the design and do a self-assessment. And that design really was, what type of information are you trying to get across to the talent group? Is it just for information? Is it something that is interactive that they then need to turnkey back at their schools or in their district or in their borough? And what's the best methodology to get that information across? Once you decided all of those things, you had to execute. And that, in pivoting at the beginning of the pandemic, was truly a challenge, in that some of us didn't have the technology skills. And so it was, what platform to use. We had access to mainly Microsoft Teams, Google Classroom, and Zoom. And they all had strengths and weaknesses at the beginning of the pandemic that most have really taken feedback from participants. And for the most part, you can use any platform. But at the beginning, it was really a challenge to decide which was the best platform to get across in the model that you wanted to get it across. Find someone who has the technology skills to support you in that, as well as develop the content. So developing the content was a no-brainer for most educators in the system, but navigating the technology was a true challenge. And as a central office, we definitely held classes and supported each other in how to execute a successful meeting without people dropping off and having to host, and those technical things that were a huge learning curve that I think most of us take for granted and can do really easily now. And then after we executed successful sessions, we really evaluated. So similar to how this session is being recorded, we recorded our sessions and then went back and looked over them and evaluated them, not only as facilitators, but we also asked our participants to evaluate our execution, not only the content of what we were delivering, but also the execution on how we delivered. And we had to reflect on that process. So what went well, and what would we like to replicate, and then where were our areas of growth? What things that we need to strengthen and change, given the feedback that we received from participants. And when we went at it the very next time, we incorporated those changes and tried to strengthen those practices that our participants found were successful and that we as facilitators also found to be successful. And then the quality assurance piece. And so a system as large as we are, we have lots of experts in various content areas, but really having teammates across divisions look at our work and say, this makes sense to me, I've learned something, or I can learn from this process, was really tough. To be vulnerable about our areas of growth, but really helpful in getting feedback for someone who just did not know the content, and was that person able to walk away from our sessions with new learning and new skills that they could then implement. And so this just created a a culture of openness and honesty so that it wasn't just about your presentation, but the success of the presentation and ensuring that the time that we were spending with participants in the virtual environment was valuable and impactful, and receiving feedback from cross-division leads it was invaluable to the success and the strengthening of our practices across the system. And finally, this is the overview of the system. It goes from chancellor's priorities to division and policy priorities to the talent groups and the outcomes that we wish to have. And at the end of the day, for our system, it's all about student strengths and students learning and the impact to make sure that all students were learning in this environment that was new to all of us, and that they didn't lose out on essential learning because we were still learning the technology to get across the instruction that we needed to get across.
And so what did we learn? First and foremost, we learned that educators really need new skills and knowledge to capitalize on new priorities, right? And obviously the pandemic lifted for us new priorities and things that we never experienced. But our three major lessons: position educators to become the drivers of their own learning. Again, as you heard us state earlier, in the past, much of the learning was compliance driven, and we recognized that we had to provide opportunities that were self-selected based on need. Provide educators with the technology tools that are responsive to their specific needs and contexts. As Nakia shared, that was our first aha moment, that we were not prepared with the tools necessary to really pivot to this virtual space, and foster collaborative relationships among educators for triple impact. So bringing back our critical friends groupings and our professional learning communities, cohorting leaders across the city based on demographics, whether it be student demographics or even geography, we recognize was very important. And so for us, and I'm going to read this, the shift towards greater organizational growth and continuous improvement, really, we grounded it and now in our professional learning and development. And we believe now to maximize adult learning, both synchronous and asynchronous environments should be used as a medium. And finally, we'd like to end, before we open with some questions, is one of our favorite quotes here is, life can only be understood backwards, but it must be lived forwards. And so while COVID-19 and the pandemics really caused us to pause, we're really proud as the largest school system in the country that we were able to reopen and serve our 1.1 million students, but also all of our adults who are leading the way.
Okay, well, that was awesome. I have a million questions, but I'm going to make sure that the audience knows, raise your hand. Let's have you ask some questions. And Doug, who's our moderator right now, will hit the little allow you to talk thing. And maybe if you don't actually speak up, I'll call on you anyway, because that's the way I roll. So really great information. And I think one of the things we have to realize is you guys are doing this at a scale that is just, no one else is even close to the scale that you're at. But what I kind of want to know, first off, is what other tech are you looking at now? Because it sounds like there was like a huge lift for your leadership just to get people on the conferencing platforms, right?
Yes.
The tech stack is a mile deep. So that was stage one. Okay. So now what's going to happen with, the surges and now they're using, an average teacher has 700 some things, apps and things and stuff going on. And then they've got weird filing habits, they're like, I dare you to find my Google Doc in the right place. It's like, it's really one of those moments, right? So it's a lot deeper. So can you both each from your own viewpoint address that?
So let me just say that there are multiple arms and divisions here within our system that support this work. So I would be remiss if I just showed up here, Nakia and I, as, just the two that, support this work for our system. So we do have a division of informational technology, as
Okay.
we also do have the chief academic office that takes care of the learning management system. So when I heard you say Google Classroom, one of the things that we spent a lot of time, I would say, I don't want to say arguing, but debating around, right, is should schools be able to self-select learning management systems, right, and imagine scale, right? So a district in other places may have 8 to 10 schools that they're serving for. And so we've, finally come to a point in which we've allowed for some self-selection. But I would say that DIIT and the Chief Academic Office, it took us some time in tandem with our office to really get to the place of some autonomy, right? And again, we were not thinking this way pre the pandemic, right? Learning management systems were in play, but not in full scale as they are now, because the need has been very different. We don't have, and I know Nakia will chime in, so as a system, we do not have a remote option for students. And so we returned fully back in person. Now, I see you kind of looking there, and so, yeah.
How long that's gonna work? Because people are like, I don't want my 5-year-old there. I'm out. I'm going. So yeah.
So far, I will say that our attendance is quite strong as a system, and yes, there have been some opposition, as I'm sure folks have heard nationally, but we have returned all of our students back. Now we can pivot to remote, so there may not be a standard remote option for families to opt in, but we can pivot very quickly based on the lessons learned and some of those tools that we've incorporated. And so if there is I don't want to get into COVID protocols, but we are able to pivot if necessary. Nakia, did you want to chime in?
Yeah.
I think because our system is so large, similar to what Rahesha said, schools were given choices, right? So when you think at the beginning of the pandemic, Zoom was the first platform to jump on board and say, if you were an educator, we're going to allow you to use our system for free. And so that was really easy and really quick for educators who were familiar with the platform or who just felt the need that they needed to get on something to be able to do Zoom. So they were the first. Because many of our schools already were Google schools, they had access to Google Classrooms and and Google Meets and that sort of thing. So initially the rollout was like, what could you get your hands on and what are you familiar with?
Yeah.
And then once seeing where the majority of schools were aligning themselves to, on the school level, it was generally Zoom and Google Classroom. On the central staff, district staff level, we were more on either Zoom or Microsoft Teams. And so that really, again, as I stated, the ease of the use of the platform and the purpose for the use really guided what you were going to utilize. So the breakout rooms in Zoom for central staff leading professional learning were as invaluable. Whereas for a classroom, Google Classroom worked because the lessons were there, everything was there, and it was one-stop shopping for schools. And really that's what drove the work. And then, like Rahesha said, we're not alone in this. We're a large system. You have, our division of instruction, you have the CAO's office, and you have other offices that are driven by student populations, that there were also some platforms that lent themselves better for translation or related services, or just the many things that students needed to be successful in the virtual space that we now had to engage in ways that, unless you're a practitioner of said content area, you're not quite sure what you need until you start administering those services. And you may say like, oh, I'm doing this, and so this platform is much more helpful for what I'm trying to achieve in this setting than another platform. So it was a lot of flexibility around what works for you to get across the learning.
Yeah, and you got to give, when you're in the middle of some, some extreme circumstances, you can't overly argue with people on that stuff. That's just fatal. Don't talk to me right now. I'm busy over here putting on fires. So I totally understand the position. So I think what I want to ask you, well, first of all, I want to invite him, please stay for the talk that we're going to do later on systemic inequity because of the model, because I think you're going to be surprised what we have to say about the research into the Uberization of learning. This is a new thing. But I do want to ask, just because we have a couple minutes left, about, kind of the design imperative, right? Are you still seeing most schools remain in terms of digital distribution, even though they're live? So they come back to class, but they're still like sending out the lessons and doing the collection of things back digitally. Because if so, probably your next big thing is digital design versus, analog. Two very different worlds in terms of directionality, right? Like how you force eyeballs to navigate so that kids don't get lost in the ether, right? It's totally different worlds. So who wants to go first?
I'll say that both Rahesha and I are parents of students of the New York school public system. I can say for myself as a parent, having the ability to navigate my son's classes and schedules from my phone is something that I don't want to give up. And it's something that his school has allowed and continued. And I also think what we as a system are prepared for is we have to do both. And so it really, we're at the beginning of our school year. We didn't start until late this year. And so I think we're also still navigating that. I think at this point, all instructors at every level, no matter the talent group, whether you're in the classroom or in the central level, just have learned to do both.
Yeah.
And incorporate as much as possible, given your setting. That flexibility model is still happening. I hear from teachers who have gone back into the classroom, they're just like, it's just much easier to do it like this activity this way. And the kids seem to have that flexibility. And our schools were open last year so we had teachers who were doing it simultaneously. They had students sitting in front of them and students on the screen in one lesson. So they have really strengthened that muscle and continue to utilize it lesson and content dependent.
And I will just say, as an office, just to respond in terms of the support for our leaders, one of the things that we were able to implement is a technology fellowship, a leadership technology fellowship, so that our leaders could come. We have 68 leaders that are led by Robin Pitts, and we partnered with Participate. And so we really took the time to explore, right? Like what do we want to imagine as a new possibilities? Did we want to just go back to, as you said, the analog way of doing things? And I think, as Nakia said, our leaders, removing myself now as a parent, said yes. Like, no, we do not. Like, we want to remain and move forward and grow in this way. So from this technology leadership fellowship, we've now identified experts from across our system. And it goes back to our train the trainer model, who at their respective districts support other principals who may have had some challenges, right, with this type of pivot. And so there are experts living throughout our city. And so that's really how our office responds to, like a problem of practice that you lifted. We hear and see the need. Obviously, as a parent, it gives us an inside perspective when you have a child that you're speaking to about these things and you can experience it. But really for us, it's about like, what are we seeing, virtually? Now we're able to visit schools in person. And so how do we respond to support so that no one feels like they're doing this alone? Right. And we're able to meet their needs in their current role, but also extend the learning beyond that moment in time. And so, again, it's the pivot and it's the moving that we cannot go backwards at all. And we have to move forward.
Yeah, well said. Well said. Well, you guys are awesome. I'm so happy to have met you and glad for the work that you're doing. Obviously it was a mad scramble and I'm sure you pleased a lot of people by being super helpful. So thank you for your work in the last year, a lot.
Thank you, LeiLani, for the opportunity. Really, thank you. It was really lots of fun to be here with you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Booker Class!
Booker Class is a digital library application designed to engage children with learning and reading in English as a second language. With hundreds of animated ebooks, songs, nursery rhymes, flashcards, and games, it develops reading comprehension, literacy, creativity, cognitive skills, and many more.
Booker Class is a digital library application that we created for teachers and students. It includes hundreds of nursery rhymes, songs, and books that we took either from classic or world literature, or our educational team wrote them specifically for the purpose of English as a second language teaching. Also, we saw that teachers don't have enough quality curated digital content, while the students want to use digital tools more and more. Every book that we create includes several unique features that make the learning process more automatic, more intuitive. We believe that storytelling itself is a very good tool to develop the children's reading comprehension, vocabulary, but also 21st century skills such as social-emotional intelligence, cognitive skills, creativity, critical thinking, problem-solving skills. These are very well-balanced animations so that they don't distract the children, but really they help them to understand the text more.
Traditional and online education will continue merging, and the hybrid model will be the new norm of the future. That's why we combine this innovative pedagogical approach of very strong technology, storytelling, and design, and created the Booker Class experience.